Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Anthony Moreno. On the program, the Border Industrial Association features new information regarding the growth of exports from New Mexico. And we also discuss how tariffs may impact that development. Joining us now is Jerry Pacheco, president of the Border Industrial Association. Mr. Pacheco also serves as executive director of the International Business Accelerator, and he writes the column Business Across the Border for the Albuquerque Journal. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me here.
We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And you're also here to share some pretty exciting news for exports in New Mexico. According to information that your team's been able to look at, it seems that the exports have grown considerably.
They've actually gone up 140% between 2023 and 2024. We are now at $12 billion of exports out of the state of New Mexico on an annual basis. I've never seen this kind of growth.
That's really fascinating. What do you think is really driving that growth?
The border. Every time a new production operation gets going, for example, Admiral Cable is one of the Taiwanese companies that we recruited. They're operational now. They're going to be generating those exports. We have brand new companies that have located and they're operational, and that pushed the exports up in 2024.
Very exciting. What seems to be the commodity that's really the hottest commodity being exported?
We have like a lot of electronic equipment, computer equipment, sensors. We do sensors that go like into automobiles, for example. But we do everything from plastic injection, metal fabrication, metal stamping. It runs the gamut of what's going on in Santa Teresa.
What are some of the other interesting data that you're getting that's really highlighting the growth there?
The Mexican exports out of New Mexico went up 101%, from about 3.4 billion to about 7 billion. Exports to China are up like 652%. Exports to Malaysia are up about 5,800%.
Wow.
So just tremendous growth. And, rather than just focusing on Mexico and China, which have typically for the last few years been the biggest, export markets, now we have like places like Malaysia that are really producing.
So what other countries seem to be really interested in New Mexico? We could just talk really about what they seem to be the most interested in regards to export.
Well, we are a production base there at the border. We make everything that would go into a car, everything that would go into computer electronics, your cell phones. We have a big copper wire producer in CN Wire. They're making millions of pounds of copper wire a month. If you'd ever go to the facility, just to give you a scale, their facility is about 3 football fields long and 1 football field wide. And they run 3 shifts making copper wire. So it's that kind of production that's really pushing the exports.
You mentioned New Mexico having such growth with trade and exports to Mexico. What's some of the things that's really driving that?
All of that stuff: packaging, plastic injection, metal fabrication, metal stamping. But it's interesting. I'm so excited about the data because when I started my career, I was mentioning the states of New Hampshire, Connecticut, Iowa exported more to Mexico than our beautiful state of New Mexico. Now New Mexico, with this latest data, is in the top 10. We're now the 9th largest exporter to Mexico.
So that's obviously really exciting for people working in economic development as well, which you also do. Mm-hmm. What possibilities could potentially lead to more jobs in the area with that type of data?
Well, what I tend to see is when we get all of this movement, we create a buzz, and then all of a sudden when firms want to establish a new operation, reshore, what have you, all of a sudden we're on the radar. So we're getting some beautiful calls and beautiful site visits. We just announced that we're going to be helping an EV bus manufacturer co-locate with the Polish battery company in Santa Teresa. So that'll also bring more development and jobs to the area. And these are really good paying jobs, really good paying jobs.
What are some of the things that companies are looking for when they reach out to you to perhaps increase production or invest more in the area, or potentially come to New Mexico to bring those jobs and bring those factories and production that have been so popular in your area?
Three things I would say. One is infrastructure. Can you support a manufacturing operation that would have 300 to 500 jobs? The second would be, do we have labor? And companies, they'd love to go into a place that has trained labor and skilled labor, but most of the companies that we recruit will train the employees themselves. And then the other thing that I find very important is your supplier base, to supply those big OEMs, those big factories. They need everything from calibration services to maintenance, building maintenance services, to supplies, what have you. Even temporary agencies are very important to companies coming in.
What are some of the things that you think can help Santa Teresa further develop when it comes to recruiting these companies, retaining them, and hopefully inviting them to invest more?
Infrastructure. The number one focus of ours in this legislative session, and we spoke to the governor's staff and the chief of staff and the speaker of the House and everybody else, we need money to keep our water, wastewater system modernized. And as we move companies in, we want to be able to have that capacity. We don't want to get to a point where we have a company and it wants to come to Santa Teresa, but we don't have capacity. So infrastructure is the number one thing.
What do you think are some of the things that could possibly get in the way of that growth? One of the things I want to bring up is the tariffs that President Trump has threatened and put into place for countries that are have trade with us. Is that a concern of yours?
It's a huge concern. I had a big meeting in downtown El Paso with other economic developers, with the Foreign Trade Zone of El Paso representatives, with manufacturers. And we sat for 2 hours discussing our own kind of stories. And it was very depressing. The tariffs, even though they haven't been applied against Canada and Mexico, we have steel tariffs, and we have steel companies, or companies use steel in Santa Teresa to produce their products. But everybody seemed to have a story of companies having a wait and see attitude. They're not expanding. A few companies have postponed hiring for the workforce and expanding the workforce. It's just a limbo thing right now. And that meeting kind of depressed me. I went back to my office and I thought, oh man, a lot of this is going on. And I've spoken to some of our companies in the industrial base, and it's very disconcerting. And it comes on the heels of all this beautiful news about our exports doubling. Our exports doubling, and then our port of entry lead in 2024 led all ports of entry in terms of growth of commercial traffic. We are up 34% last year.
What do you think really attributes to that growth?
Well, it's all that new commerce coming in. It's also trade passing through Santa Teresa. There's a lot more companies, for example, in the state of Chihuahua that have finally discovered that Santa Teresa is a great port because you can cross there faster and there's no crossing fees.
Speaking of that port, you and some lawmakers have certainly been pushing for that port to be updated. Can you kind of share with us where the efforts are right now?
Well, last year GSA did a final feasibility study on the expansion of the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. They concluded that we should go from 3 northbound commercial lanes to 14 at the port, and we should go from 4 northbound passenger lanes to 12, and then a couple of more entries into Mexico. So that's done. This year, we're working with our congressional delegation to get on GSA's priority list. You've got to be on the priority list to get your design, engineering, and your environmental impact studies. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that we are on that priority list this year. Once that's done, and once we get those things done, we're about to become shovel ready.
If that port of entry is able to come online and get updated, further with all those extra lanes and the new technology that may be needed, how big of a game changer could that be?
It's a game changer because the Bridge of the Americas, which is El Paso's second most trafficked port of entry or bridge, is going to be shut down possibly this year for reconstruction. And from all the people I've talked to that are involved in that, that probably won't be ready till 2029. So that's like squeezing the sausage of northbound commercial traffic. It's going to have to go to Zaragoza Port of Entry, and the other half will probably go to Santa Teresa, or a big portion of that. So it's imperative as we go through these infrastructure changes that we have a port of entry that's not only from an infrastructural standpoint capable of handling that traffic, but we have the personnel there with Customs and Border Protection.
How could that also have a ripple effect in the economy of southern Doña Ana County and El Paso?
Well, the more commercial truck traffic you can push through your port of entry, the more opportunities you have to recruit businesses. Also, the more of a case you have with Washington that we need more personnel, we need more infrastructure. Keep investing in the port of entry, keep investing in our roads and federal infrastructure there. So it gives us a better case to get more funding.
There's certainly been a lot of talk about curbing illegal drugs into the United States. I'd like to hear from you. How do you think an updated port could really make a difference in that area?
The bulk of all illegal drugs entering the United States, the overwhelming majority, something like 80%, are coming through ports of entry, through private vehicles, sometimes through commercial vehicles. And you mentioned the technology. We have the highest technology at the port of entry to survey or look at the trucks. And I hope the Trump administration, with its effort on trying to curb illegal drugs coming into the United States, understands that ports of entry need to be invested in so we can have that ability to curb that flow of drugs into the United States.
One of the other things that has been brought up already is the potential tariffs with Canada and Mexico. It appears right now there's an agreement between the United States and Mexico and Canada. Let's talk about Mexico, because both countries have really responded in their own ways. How are you concerned? How much are you concerned about that agreement not working out to where there could be a potential trade war with Mexico?
Extremely, extremely concerned. I mean, it's like a black cloud is hanging over the border right now, especially with all this good news about exports. It's the topic of every day. I've done interviews, I'm not kidding, maybe 3 to 4. We appeared in the New York Times, by the way. Everybody wants to know how this is going to affect our lives. And the simple answer is higher tariffs mean higher prices for you and me, the consumer, because that 25%, if these tariffs are imposed, are going to flow down the supply chain down to you and I. It might decrease market share for some of our companies. It might cause some of the producers in Mexico or some of the plants to look elsewhere for products or raw materials that they're getting and sourcing from the United States. So it's extremely disruptive. The uncertainty right now is disruptive, but if the tariffs are imposed, it will be very disruptive.
Can you tell us a little bit about just how this growth in exports has also impacted the Mexican side of the border with factories on the other side? And is that, if the tariffs do go through, could that impact those jobs in that economy as well?
Most definitely. Foxconn just went through about a 1.2 million square foot expansion on top of the 1.5 million that they already have. So they're moving some production from Asia to San Jeronimo, which is just on the other side of the border of Santa Teresa. About 3 weeks ago, I was at the inauguration of a new paper mill there in San Jeronimo. That paper would be exported, some of it to the United States. And then we have a brand new, we have 2 gummy bear factories now, making everything from, they're making gummy bears and other confectionery. A lot of that comes to the United States. So the tariffs are going to be hitting them also. And Mexico's already promised to put reciprocal tariffs on U.S. goods. So we really don't want to go down that road.
Here in the borderland, there's so much involved with both sides of the border, and whether it's the economy or whether it's just family and relationships, and as neighbors, if one side is hit with an economic downturn, how does that have a ripple effect?
Oh, I mean, when we've had economic downturns at the border, it hurts everybody. It's not just the production plants or distribution, it's the people that maintain lawns, it's the people that provide support services, it's the employees not getting hired, it's the ability, hurts the ability of families to go buy, let's say, consumer products. You tend to hold on to your refrigerator a little longer rather than buying a new one because the economic outlook's uncertain. So we do not want to go into that. We're going through a period now between Mexico and the United States and Canada of prosperity. We're doing very well, and we don't need the disruption at this point.
The last time we talked, you mentioned that the trade agreement between all 3 countries is also up for review soon. How much do you feel is weighing on these conversations between the countries on how that review is going to go?
Well, yeah, my personal opinion is I tend to view the tariffs as a bargaining tool that the Trump administration is using to kind of gain leverage against our 2 North American partners. And I hope that's the case. And I hope that results in whatever the Trump administration wants, so we can address that with the USMCA agreement. But without that USMCA agreement, we lose the ability to compete as a North American trade bloc against Asia, against Europe, what have you. Our economies are so symbiotic, intertwined. To see the trade agreement going away or to see the tariffs being imposed would be just catastrophic.
President Trump has also, made executive orders about enhancing border security and enforcement. Do you have any concerns about that impacting the growth of Santa Teresa and the surrounding communities there?
The immigration flows northward from Mexico. The undocumented entries are a trickle of what they were in 2023. And that's because Mexico agreed to step up its efforts, intercept caravans, stop a lot of the migrants that are trying to cross in the United States. Plus, when President Biden signed the presidential decree saying that if you're an undocumented entry, you have no right to apply for asylum and you're gone. So those 2 things have really curbed the immigration flows.
How do you feel that tariffs and the taxing of goods from China could possibly escalate into something greater? Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, it's already affecting some of our businesses. A lot of Chinese steel and a lot of Chinese steel products are imported into the United States. And I know in our industrial base, there's firms that are getting dinged because of that. The U.S. and China, we don't want to go down the road further in a trade war. China is a very important factor in terms of manufacturing in the world. It's now, the king of manufacturing. But we're not going to bring back overnight a lot of that production that we want to bring back using tariffs. When a company develops its workforce and supply base in the place it's currently located, it's hard to pull up stakes and move somewhere else and all of a sudden you're productive overnight. So we need to really look at that relationship and see how we could benefit each other's economies.
So are tariffs good or bad for the economy?
tariffs are bad for the economy. There are certain times that they're good. If China, let's say, is flooding our market with some type of product and they're subsidizing it at the governmental level in China and it's killing off our industry, yes, tariffs are good. But all around kind of general tariffs like we're doing right now doesn't really help anybody. And the ones that are proposed against Mexico and Canada make no sense whatsoever. We're essentially going to be taxing a U.S. company that's bringing product in that it's making in Mexico. We're essentially taxing our own companies by applying tariffs on Mexican goods.
How are tariffs on the U.S.? Would you rate them low, medium, high, or does it just depend on the industry?
U.S. tariffs typically have been very low historically. I mean, depends on the period of time. If you're looking at the 1930s, we got into a trade war with the rest of the world, and a lot of scholars attribute what Japan did in terms of invading Korea and Asia with those tariffs, because we cut them off for fuel, we cut them off of key supplies, rubber, what have you. I'm not saying that that's going to happen in the future. I hope that doesn't happen. But free trade agreements allow, let's say, in our case, the North American trade bloc, to put the best, to have the best of the three countries at the disposal of a company. So you have a company, we have companies in Santa Teresa that have plants in Mexico, distribution centers in Santa Teresa, or we're exporting components and raw materials to Mexico, and we get efficiencies and lower costs by that.
How concerned are you about a bigger trade war breaking out with China?
Very concerned. I don't know how, there's not too much left that we can apply a tariff on anymore coming in from China. But we could up and increase the tariffs and they would do the same thing to us. And it's gonna hurt everybody from our high-tech companies to our agricultural sector, because China imports a lot of U.S. agricultural products. Think of New Mexico. Our pecan industry is big in terms of exporting to China. We are big sending wheat, soybeans, corn to Mexico. So those sectors, if we go down that road, are going to be whacked.
So you're talking about agriculture could see a really big hit?
Yes. Well, and it was during the first Trump term, and it suffered immediately. And if you recall, the Trump administration had to come up with some subsidies to kind of fill the gap there on what they were not exporting and selling.
I want to get back to exports, because obviously that's some exciting news about seeing the growth in exports from New Mexico. You wrote a column about our greatest growth as a country is our culture.
Absolutely.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it was a kind of a feel-good column, and in the midst of all this dark cloud and kind of anxiety. I had a visit by a Polish battery company, this one I was discussing earlier, and the two gentlemen from Poland were just entranced by the Southwest. The desert, oh my God, is that a cactus? What is that? What do you call that? That's a yucca. And then I took them for some authentic Mexican food, and they love spicy food. The only thing they really only had is Taco Bell in Poland.
Oh, wow.
And so I took them to an authentic Mexican restaurant there in Santa Teresa, and it looked like nirvana for them. And literally their plate was completely cleaned, and that was the best Mexican food I've had in my life. And it occurred to me, our culture, all of our movies, all of our content that we produce is so popular around the world, and I was so proud that I could showcase my state of New Mexico for these guys, and that they want to come back. And I told them about Santa Fe, and I told them about Las Cruces and Albuquerque. We're going to come back, and next time we're going to set aside a week and we're going to see the state of New Mexico. And I said, well, if I have time, I'll be your guide.
That's really exciting news, obviously, and to build those connections with folks and businesses. I do want to talk with you about the legislative session in New Mexico. I just have a couple of minutes left with you, but what are some of the big things that you're trying to address with lawmakers now, especially when you have this good news about exports taking off? Yeah,
in this session, we don't have any specific piece of legislation that we're necessarily floating or what have you. So in a 60-day session, we monitor, and oftentimes we play defense against things that maybe would be detrimental to our industrial base. But we're working with our local legislators. We have a great southern delegation. Representative Ray Lada is our representative. We have Senator Joseph Cervantes and Senator Kerry Hamlin that are very, very attentive to our needs. One message only: water infrastructure. That's what we need. And I think that message is very clear up there in Santa Fe.
Well, water certainly always brings a lot of conversations in New Mexico. What are some of the big things that you'd like to address with water?
Well, we've been working with NMSU for the past 6 years on a desalinization project. NMSU delivered the final study this last year. So our group, the Border Industrial Association, has been meeting with Sunland Park and the Camino Real Regional Utility Authority, which is our authority for water and wastewater, to kind of figure out the economics of how we go forward with this information. When is it going to be the right time that we pull the trigger on this thing? How much is it going to cost in a couple of years? Will the cost of water be feasible? So we're very excited about that. We're working on that in a unified manner right now.
I only have about 30 seconds left with you, but how hopeful are you that all of this trade talk and tariffs can get worked out?
I'm an optimist. I think it would be disastrous, and I think the people around President Trump and possibly President Trump himself would know how disruptive to the U.S. economy this would be. And the last thing he wants to do is come in and create inflation and create a crisis. Part of his campaign was, the economy's in shambles, I'm going to fix it. Well, let's keep it going and let's not break it.
Jerry Pacheco, President of the Border Industrial Association, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Newsmakers. Remember, you can always keep updated with news anytime at our website, krwg.org. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.